How you doing? Do you mind if I come in and have a chat to you for a minute? Where's the dough?
What dough?
Some shows entertain, others make you think. And then there are the rare ones, the ones that do both. Mr. Inbetween is one of those shows. At first glance, it's a darkly comedic story about a hitman navigating life. But underneath, it's brutally honest. It's an exploration of violence, not just as an action, but as a form of communication.
I mean, I'm pretty big on just respect. Like, if you respect me, I respect you. You know, if you don't, we got a problem.
It doesn't glorify violence, but it doesn't shy away from it either. Instead, it forces us to sit with it, to see what it really is. And that's what makes this show brilliant. So we like to believe that violence is always wrong, that it should be avoided at all costs. But deep down, we also know that sometimes it works.
The world is full of assholes, Ray. You do realise that?
Yeah, and you know why?
Why?
Because people let them get away with it.
And Mr. Inbetween makes us confront that uncomfortable truth.
So if you're in jail, right, and you fuck with somebody, you disrespect somebody, you can end up dead. There's consequences. But out here in the real world, there's no consequences.
Now, Ray Shoesmith isn't just a hitman. He's a father, a friend, a guy trying to hold his life together. He doesn't look for chaos. He is the one that removes it in a world that plays by very different rules. Mr. Inbetween creates blurry lines between justice and cruelty, and this makes us question our own moral position as we find ourselves liking a man who should really be the bad guy. But let's be real. Violence, as much as we might hate to admit it, has always been a form of control. Whether it's in war, law enforcement, or personal disputes, societies have historically used violence to show dominance, settle conflicts, and reinforce power structures.
How do I put this? Do you think there is a difference in the act of killing between when you're in the army and what you do now? Does it feel any different?
No, killing's killing. You know, you get medals in the army for when you kill people, but, you know, I don't get those anymore. But,
yeah, I can't imagine hitmen get medals.
Mr. Inbetween leans into this uncomfortable truth. But here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Ray knows that what he does isn't right in a moral sense. He's not deluded. Yet, cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort we feel when our actions contradict our values, don't seem to weigh on him the way it might for others.
How many people, if you had to guess, how many people would you say that you've assaulted?
Heaps.
Now, how do you feel about that?
Fine, had it coming, so.
Maybe because for him, violence, it isn't personal. It's transactional. And when something is just business, it's easier to detach. Except, of course, when it isn't.
Do you ever feel sorry for any of your victims?
Not really, no.
Never.
What would I?
Well, what about their families?
What about him?
Now, Ray's relationship with his daughter, Brittany, is where we see the contrast. He's protective, he's caring, and deeply invested in her well-being. And yet this same man will beat someone to a pulp if the situation calls for it. It's a contradiction, but it's not as rare as it seems. We see Ray as a loving dad, a loyal friend, and a protective brother to Bruce. And in the quiet moments of the show, we really start to feel Ray's weird, conflicted world. As we watch him with his best friend Gary, his brother Bruce, and his relationships, more so with Allie, we see his struggle between connection with people and his other world. He has a circle of people he'd break bones to protect. So when is violence seen as a shield for love? Does this justify it or just deepen the divide?
Why the f would you take a present off a little kid? You're a grown man. What the f do you want with a fucking girly candle?
This is where compartmentalization comes in. The psychological defense mechanism allows people to separate conflicting thoughts and behaviors, keeping them in distinct mental boxes. The Ray isn't justifying his actions, he's dividing them.
Do you enjoy hitting people?
I wouldn't say I enjoy hitting people. You know, if I hit somebody, I generally got a pretty good reason.
He's a father in one world and a hitman in another. But what happens when these boxes start to blur? We see glimpses of it throughout the show, small cracks in the foundation. His ability to keep those two sides separate is what allows him to function. But if one bleeds into the other, the whole thing just collapses.
You could have at least tried to talk to the guy, you know? Maybe tried to diffuse the situation.
Yeah, but that would have given his partner time to get out of the car.
And the scary part, it's not just criminals who do this. We all do it to some degree. We act one way at work, another way at home. But what happens when the lines get too blurry?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I love you. I do. Know that. And walking away from someone that you love is one of the hardest fucking things in the world to do.
There's a moment in the show where Ray is asked if violence ever truly solves anything. And his response?
Can you give me one example of violence ever working?
World War II?
World War II.
We didn't beat the Nazis just by talking to them. We used violence.
And that's hard to argue with. But then the conversation shifts. What about smaller personal conflicts? Is violence still justified? Is there such a thing as good violence and bad violence?
But out here in the real world, there's no consequences, right?
This is where Machiavellianism comes in. The idea that manipulation, intimidation, and strategic aggression are just tools in a larger game of power. Ray doesn't just lash out, he calculates. His violence isn't emotional. It's matter of fact, it's necessary, routine and transactional rather than glorified or dramatized.
I'll get you your money, okay?
I don't want any money.
What do you mean?
Well, it's not my job to collect money, it's his job.
That's what separates him from a mindless brute. He knows when to use violence and, more importantly, when not to. But at what cost?
Can you see how violence is perhaps not the best way for you to resolve your disputes?
No, I think it generally is.
If violence is always an option, does that mean he ever has peace? Of course, Ray wasn't born this way. He learned it. This is where social learning theory comes in.
You bullied at school?
Mm-hmm.
Bad?
Pretty bad.
Were you beaten up?
Mm-hmm.
We don't just act, we imitate. People, especially men, in violent environments, absorb the behaviors that they see reinforced. Ray has seen violence work. He's been rewarded for it. It's how he solves problems, how he protects people, how he establishes respect. And in this world, that's just how things work. But here's the problem with that. Once violence becomes the default response, it's almost impossible to unlearn. Because the moment you step away from it, you become vulnerable.
Well, you gotta fight back, you know? Otherwise
what?
Otherwise people will walk all over you.
Ray's violence protects him, but it also isolates him. He lives by the sword, and that also means he dies by it. Now, the brilliance of Mr. Inbetween is that it never gives us a straight answer. Ray isn't a hero, but he's not entirely a villain either. He's something in between, just like most people.
Gonna miss you. So...
And that's what makes the show so unsettling. Because if someone like Ray, a hitman, can still make us empathize with him, then what does that say about our own morality? Maybe we're not as far removed from him as we'd like to believe. If Mr. Inbetween leaves us with anything, I think it's questions. And that's what makes it great. We don't get neat answers, just like in real life. Instead, we're left to wrestle with these ideas ourselves. And maybe that's the point. Because the moment we start thinking about violence, not just as something abstract, but as something real, something human, that's when we start to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, that's when we start to break the cycle.